At 12:47 p.m. on March 14, 1944, Corporal James "Jimmy" Kelleher pressed his eye to the scope of his Springfield M1903, aiming across the Rapido River Valley at a German observation post 480 yards away. The man he targeted was positioned inside what should have been an impregnable shelter, a reinforced concrete bunker with firing slits carefully staggered to prevent any direct line of sight. For 3 weeks, Allied snipers had tried in vain to neutralize that position. 17 soldiers had been killed in failed frontal attacks. Yet the German observer inside remained completely protected, continually directing artillery that claimed the lives of 8 Americans every single day. Over the next 4 minutes, Kelleher would send one round through a structural gap no wider than a playing card, eliminating a target that, according to Army doctrine, was unreachable. Within 6 weeks, his method would spread throughout every Allied sniper unit in Italy and would be credited with destroying 127 fortified enemy posts and saving an estimated 340 American lives. This is the story of how a Boston pool hall hustler reshaped sniper doctrine using geometric principles that West Point instructors had never imagined. James Kelleher grew up in the Charlestown neighborhood of Massachusetts, living in a cramped 3-room tenement that always smelled of boiled cabbage and motor oil. His father worked grueling 16-hour shifts on the Charlestown Navy Yard docks, loading munitions for Depression-era wages. Jimmy spent most of his boyhood inside Murphy's Pool Hall on Main Street, not out of mischief, but because he possessed a rare talent. While other kids played stickball, 12-year-old Jimmy was calculating deflection angles off pool table cushions and sinking improbable combination shots that defied ordinary straight-line intuition. Frank Murphy, the hall's owner, quickly realized the kids saw angles no one else could. "You think in ricochets," Frank once told him. "Most people see a ball and a pocket. You see every surface it might bounce off on its way there." Jimmy never finished high school. He dropped out at 16 to take over his father's job when the older man injured his back. By 1942, Jimmy was leading a rigging crew, reading engineering blueprints for crane operations, and calculating load-bearing angles for ship repair work. When news of Pearl Harbor broke, he enlisted the very next morning. A recruiter noticed crane operator on his paperwork and sent him to Fort Benning for infantry training. Everything changed on the rifle range. Kelleher qualified as an expert marksman with scores so high the instructors double-checked them for possible cheating. But what truly caught their eye wasn't just his accuracy, it was the strange positions he used. While other trainees shot prone, kneeling, or standing, Kelleher searched for unconventional angles, taking shots around barriers, beneath obstacles, and even using reflective surfaces. He always aligned himself at just the right angle. "Kid shoots like he's solving geometry problems instead of fighting a war," one sergeant wrote in his file. They made him a sniper and deployed him to North Africa, then to Sicily, and finally up the Italian mainland with the 36th Infantry Division. By March 1944, he had 19 confirmed kills, solid, unremarkable. He followed training manuals by the book: find elevation, estimate range, adjust for wind, and squeeze. The Germans died, the front moved slowly. Then the Rapido River Valley changed everything. The fortifications of the Gustav Line represented a year and a half of meticulous German engineering. Each bunker, pillbox, and observation post had been designed by experts who understood that superior construction and positioning outweighed firepower. The Allies hammered these strong points with artillery for weeks. Explosions tore open massive craters. The Germans merely waited underground, then re-emerged to begin killing again. Monte Cassino loomed over the entire valley. German spotters tracked every American movement, and directed artillery with frightening accuracy. One observation post in particular, designated Strongpoint 7 in intelligence reports, was entrenched in concrete along the mountainside, exactly 480 yards from American lines. The German observer inside possessed an unobstructed view of the entire valley floor. Every Allied maneuver drew artillery fire within 90 seconds. Sniper doctrine offered a clear instruction: take out the observer. But Strongpoint 7 had been created by someone who clearly understood ballistics. The firing slit faced sideways relative to any likely sniper position. Its reinforced concrete walls were 3 feet thick. Even if a sniper located a viable angle, the slit itself measured only 18 inches across and 8 inches high. The German spotters stayed far enough inside the bunker to remain invisible from any direct approach. Lieutenant Marcus Chen of the 141st Infantry Regiment tried first. On March 1, 1944, at 6:15 a.m., Chen set himself up 520 yards northeast of the target and timed his shot for the 32-second interval when the morning sun might briefly silhouette the observer. He fired, and his round sparked off the concrete 6 inches left of the slit. The return shot arrived within 8 seconds. German snipers had been waiting for any muzzle flash. Chen died instantly from a bullet to the throat. He was 23 from Sacramento and engaged to a nurse named Dorothy, who received the telegram 9 days later. Sergeant William Morrison tried on March 4, 1944, at 2:30 p.m. He believed that heavy suppressive fire might push the observer back long enough for an American assault team to move forward. Morrison unleashed 17 rounds in 40 seconds, all aimed at the firing slit. 3 entered the bunker, but none struck the observer. The German replied by calling in a mortar barrage. Morrison and 2 members of his squad were killed by the first explosion. Morrison was 31 from Tulsa. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Sarah, who would hold on to his final letter for 60 years.
Private First Class Eddie Donovan made the 3rd attempt on March 8, 1944, early in the morning. Donovan was 20 years old, born and raised in Brooklyn, and had been a Golden Gloves boxer before the war. He didn't try to fire through the slit at all. Instead, he attempted to crawl forward under a screen of smoke until he could get close enough to throw a grenade. The German machine gun crew ripped through the smoke with low, sweeping fire. Donovan collapsed in a shell crater just 15 yards from the bunker and bled to death. No one could retrieve his body for 4 days. Kelleher had watched Morrison die. The night before, the two had shared a foxhole, exchanging stories about their lives back home. Morrison had shown him photographs, his daughter swinging on a tire, his wife wearing a Sunday dress. "When this is over," Morrison had said, "I'm teaching Sarah how to fish, taking her to Lake Texoma, spending a whole summer doing nothing at all." The next morning, Morrison was buried in a mass grave along with 17 other men. 3 snipers dead, 14 infantrymen lost during assault attempts. The German observer was still fully operational. Every briefing repeated the same bleak message: Strongpoint 7 continues to direct artillery fire. No viable solution found. Kelleher spent 6 days analyzing the bunker. He drew diagrams on the backs of cigarette packs, working out angle after angle with a carpenter's protractor he had borrowed from an engineering unit. The obstacle wasn't the concrete. The flaw was the mindset. Everyone kept thinking in straight lines: direct shots, direct charges, direct suppressive fire. The German engineers had designed the bunker specifically to defeat straight-line threats, but Kelleher had grown up in a pool hall. On March 12th, he approached Captain Raymond Hayes during the morning briefing. "Sir, I request permission to engage Strongpoint 7. Hayes looked up from his coffee. "Kelleher, 3 snipers have already tried. All 3 died. They tried direct fire, sir. I'm proposing indirect fire. Hayes shook his head. Indirect fire is for artillery, Corporal. Not artillery indirect fire, sir. Indirect rifle fire, off the beam gap. Hayes stared at him. The what? Kelleher unfolded his sketches. The bunker roof is supported by steel I-beams. The Germans offset the firing slit to block any straight shot, but they had to leave structural openings where the beams meet the walls. There's a 3-inch gap 18 inches above the firing slit if I shoot from bearing 247 with a 32-foot elevation advantage. I can hit that gap. He pointed at the sketch. The bullet will strike the inner angle of the I-beam, deflect downward, and enter the firing slit at roughly 40 degrees. Hayes studied the drawing. You're telling me you want to bounce a rifle round off a steel beam like a pool trick? Yes, sir. That's insane. It's geometry, sir. Hayes let out a long breath. This is the kind of thing people get court-martialed for. If you waste ammunition on some stunt while men are dying. Kelleher met his gaze. Men are dying because we keep repeating the same straight-line doctrine. Morrison died because we don't think in angles. Chen died because we're predictable. Donovan died because we've run out of ideas. Hayes remained silent for half a minute. Finally, he said, "You get 1 shot, Corporal. 1. If you miss, you're back on routine patrol. If you hit, we'll discuss it. And if you get yourself killed, I'll write to your mother explaining you died doing something that should never have worked." Understood, sir. Hayes returned to his maps. Dismissed. Kelleher spent that night calculating. The structural gap was 3 inches wide. From a distance of 480 yards, it was a window smaller than a coin. The deflection off the I-beam's interior surface would redirect the bullet downward by roughly 43 degrees, but only if it struck the exact point where the beam met the wall. The German observer would likely be positioned about 6 feet back from the firing slit, standard procedure for protected observation. A bullet entering at a 43-degree angle would hit him in the torso, if every variable aligned perfectly. The wind in the valley shifted every 8 minutes. Day-night temperature differences swung by 30 degrees, affecting air density. The Springfield M1903 was accurate to 800 yards in ideal circumstances, but these were not ideal circumstances. Kelleher was attempting to send a bullet through a 3-inch gap nearly 5 football fields away and make it ricochet off a steel beam at exactly the right point to kill a man he couldn't see. On March 14, 1944, at 11:15 a.m., Kelleher moved into position. He had selected the ruins of a farmhouse 480 yards from Strongpoint 7, exactly at bearing 247 degrees, giving him an elevation advantage of 34 feet, close enough to his calculations. He cleared debris from a second-story window, carved out a small opening among the rubble, and lay prone. The smells hit him immediately. Spilled aviation fuel from a burned-out truck mixed with the sickly sweetness of week-old corpses scattered across no man's land. The stone floor felt icy against his chest despite the midday sun. His hands smelled of gun oil and the eggs he had eaten earlier. He pulled the rifle tight into his shoulder. Through the scope, the bunker filled his sight picture. The firing slit was there, a black rectangle cut into gray concrete. Above it, barely noticeable, the tiny shadow of the beam gap, just 3 inches where steel met wall. Problem 1. The gap wasn't perfectly straight. The I-beam had been installed with a slight upward tilt on the left side, maybe 2 degrees. That would change the deflection. He shifted his aim 6 inches to the right to compensate for the redirected angle. Problem 2. He couldn't see the German, couldn't confirm his exact position, couldn't be sure the geometry would work even if he hit the beam dead on. Everything about this attempt was theoretical. Morrison had died following established certainty. Kelleher was gambling lives on trigonometry done with a borrowed protractor. His thumb throbbed. He had cut it on a sea ration can that morning, and the raw skin scraped against the rifle's stock. Sweat trickled down his forehead, even though the air was cold. The scope's eye relief wasn't perfect. A faint shadow ring made precise aiming harder than it should have been. He chambered around. The metallic click sounded impossibly loud. Somewhere beyond the valley, German soldiers were eating lunch, writing letters, cleaning their rifles. One of them was inside that bunker, scanning the valley floor, waiting for the next moment to summon artillery that would kill more Americans. The moral equation was brutally simple. If this worked, that German would die. If it didn't, more Americans would die, trying the same failed methods.
Kelleher had been raised in the Catholic faith. Before deploying, he had gone to confession and had been reassured that killing in war did not constitute murder. But now, lying here preparing to attempt what was essentially an execution guided by pool hall geometry, that theological comfort felt fragile. Morrison's daughter would never get the chance to learn to fish with her father. Chen's fiancée, Dorothy, had already received the telegram. Donovan's mother had laid her only son to rest 3 days earlier. Kelleher adjusted the scope. The crosshair settled neatly over the beam gap. The wind had dropped to absolute stillness, an extremely rare stroke of luck. The temperature was stable. Visibility was perfect. Every variable aligned as well as they ever would. He released a slow breath. At the bottom of his exhale, in the pause between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The M1903 bucked into his shoulder. The shot cracked sharply across the valley. Through the scope, Kelleher watched the bullet's vapor trail for an instant before it vanished into the narrow gap between the wall and the steel beam. Then, nothing. No secondary noise. No sign of impact. No way to know whether the bullet had struck the beam precisely or simply embedded itself in concrete. The bunker remained still across the valley. The firing slit stayed pitch black. Strongpoint 7 looked exactly the same as it had half a minute before. Kelleher didn't move. Standard sniper procedure demanded 60 seconds of absolute stillness after a shot. Movement drew enemy fire. Even a miss required calm evaluation before repositioning. He kept his eye on the scope, monitoring for any change. 20 seconds passed. Nothing. 30 seconds. Only a soft gust of wind brushing through dead grass below. 40 seconds. A small bird landed on the bunker roof, pecked at something, then flew off. At 47 seconds, the rear bunker door opened. A German soldier stepped out and moved quickly, though not running, around to the front, disappearing from Kelleher's view as he entered through the firing slit access. 10 seconds later, he backed out again, shouting frantically towards the rear. 3 more Germans rushed out, one darting back inside while the others yelled to each other. Kelleher couldn't hear their words, but he recognized the body language instantly. Alarm, confusion, the universal reaction of soldiers discovering that their forward observer was dead. The shot had worked. Kelleher remained in place for 8 more minutes, watching the Germans' frantic activity. They completely evacuated the bunker. No new observer took the position. By 1:15 p.m., Strongpoint 7 was deserted. For the first time in 3 weeks, the valley was free of directed artillery fire. Captain Hayes found Kelleher 20 minutes later. "Did you take that shot?" "Yes, sir." "The Germans have abandoned Strongpoint 7. Infantry is moving in to confirm." "Yes, sir." Hayes studied him carefully. "How confident are you that you hit the target?" 90%, sir. Maybe 95. Jesus. Hayes lit a cigarette, hands unsteady. "You realize what you just did goes against every sniper doctrine we teach?" "Yes, sir." "You fired at a target you couldn't see, using a ricochet method that isn't in any manual, based on geometric math most soldiers couldn't work out with 3 hours in a textbook." "Yes, sir." Hayes took a long drag. "The radio just confirmed it. The German observer is dead. Single bullet wound, downward path. Entry through the upper chest, exit lower abdomen. Exactly like you described." He exhaled smoke. "They're calling it impossible. The intelligence officer thinks the Germans accidentally shot their own man." Kelleher kept silent. "But I know what really happened, and so do you." Hayes brushed ash from his fingers. "I'm not writing this up, Corporal. If I put this in a report, some general will order every sniper in Italy to start attempting trick shots. Most of them will fail. Good men will die trying to copy something that should not work." "Understood, sir." "But," Hayes added quietly, meeting his eyes, "if someone asks you how you did it, you tell them. If another sniper wants to learn, teach him, quietly, off the books. We need this ability. We just can't make it official." "Understood, sir." Hayes dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his boot. "Morrison would have loved to see this. He always said you thought differently from the rest of us." "Morrison was a good man, sir." "He was." Hayes turned to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, Corporal, you just saved lives. Dozens, maybe hundreds. You won't get a medal for it, but you did the right thing." "Thank you, sir." When Hayes was gone, Kelleher stayed seated in the ruins of the farmhouse. His hands were still trembling. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving exhaustion and something else. A hollow ache that could have been grief, or relief, or simply the realization that he had just proven Army doctrine incomplete. Morrison was still dead. Chen was still dead. Donovan was still dead. But maybe the next fortified observer post wouldn't require 3 dead Americans to neutralize. That evening, a corporal from Baker Company approached Kelleher in the chow line. "Heard you knocked out Strongpoint 7? News spreads. How'd you do it?" Kelleher hesitated. Hayes said, "If someone asks, tell them." "You know those bunkers have I-beams holding up the roof?" "Yeah." "There's a 3-inch gap where the beam meets the wall. If you hit it at the right angle, the bullet deflects off the inner surface of the beam and drops straight into the bunker." The corporal stared. "You're telling me you banked a rifle shot off steel?" "Geometry. Same idea as a pool shot off the rail." "That's insane." "That's physics." The corporal went quiet for a moment. "Could you teach someone to do that? If they can do the math, understand the angles?" "I can do math. Baker Company has 3 snipers. We've been trying to take out Strongpoint 12 for a week."
The layout of Strongpoint 12 was the same as Strongpoint 7, an offset firing slit, reinforced concrete walls, an observer hidden deep inside. Kelleher studied the corporal. "You have a protractor?" "I can get one." "Meet me after chow. Bring your rifle and something to write with." By the next morning, 4 snipers understood Kelleher's beam gap method. By the afternoon, 7 did. No one used formal terms like indirect fire or deflection shooting. Those phrases sounded too technical, too official, and might draw the wrong kind of officer scrutiny. Instead, the technique spread among the enlisted men as the gap shot, or Kelleher's angle, or simply the trick. On March 16, 1944, Sergeant Thomas Riley of Baker Company went after Strongpoint 12, a German observation bunker built of thick concrete with an offset firing slit, an almost exact replica of Strongpoint 7. Riley had spent 2 hours with Kelleher the previous night, learning how to spot structural gaps, calculate deflection angles, and adjust for how the beams sat inside the walls. Kelleher fired at 2:47 p.m. from a distance of 510 yards. His bullet entered the beam gap, ricocheted off an I-beam, and struck the German observer in the head. Strongpoint 12 fell silent. Baker Company advanced 400 yards that afternoon without a single piece of artillery landing near them. That night, every sniper in the 36th Infantry Division wanted to know how Riley had pulled it off. The method spread without any paperwork. No official reports, no training bulletins, no engineering breakdowns. It moved through whispered conversations in foxholes, crude diagrams scratched into the ground, experienced snipers quietly teaching newcomers the geometry their instructors had never explained. By March 20th, 15 snipers were attempting beam gap shots. 8 succeeded. The other 7 missed, studied the reasons for their errors, adjusted their calculations, and prepared to try again.
The German 1st Fallschirmjäger Division was the first to notice. An intelligence report dated March 22, 1944, recovered after the war, stated, "American snipers exhibit unprecedented effectiveness against fortified observation posts. 3 bunkers neutralized in 5 days using an unidentified method. Estimated losses, 3 observers, 2 forward artillery coordinators." The report recommended immediate tactical review. German combat engineers inspected the abandoned positions and found bullet strikes in unexpected places. They discovered rounds embedded in I-beams, reconstructed the angles, and realized what the Americans were doing. But understanding the trick didn't help them stop it. Beam gaps were inherent to the bunker's architecture. Eliminating them would require completely redesigning every structure from the ground up. German doctrine shifted. Observers were ordered to stand farther back from firing slits, 12 feet instead of 6. This reduced visibility over the battlefield, made artillery spotting less accurate, and slowed down their response times. The psychological effect on the Germans was greater than the physical losses. Oberlieutenant Friedrich Hartmann, a highly respected sniper with 43 confirmed kills, encountered the technique on March 27th. His after-action account read, "Positioned in optimal counter-sniper location, no direct line to enemy. American round entered through a structural gap I considered non-threatening. Bullet deflected downward, killing observer Grenadier Cowell. Immediate withdrawal required. Represents fundamental shift in American sniper capability." By April 1, 1944, German frontline units were receiving artillery support 20% slower than before March 14th. American attacks faced less accurate defensive fire. Casualty rates in the 36th Infantry Division fell from 37% to 23% during operations in the Rapido Valley sector. No one at division headquarters understood why. Official acknowledgement came not through a report, but through an absence of explanation. In late April, a colonel from Army Intelligence visited the 36th Division. He conducted interviews, surveyed abandoned German positions, and reviewed casualty data. His classified report noted a sharp improvement in counter-observation performance, but credited it to enhanced sniper training and better intelligence on enemy fortification design. Kelleher's name appeared nowhere. By May 1944, the technique had spread to the British 8th Army. A British sniper named Geoffrey Morrison, unrelated to William Morrison, took out a German observation post near Monte Cassino using the beam gap method. When his commanding officer asked where he learned it, Morrison replied, "Some Yank corporal showed me at a supply depot. Didn't catch his name." After D-Day, the method reached France. American snipers in Normandy used it against German pillboxes embedded in the bocage hedgerows. No one tracked statistics, no one produced official documents. The method existed between the lines of doctrine, passed from soldier to soldier by demonstration and shared experience. Conservative estimates credit beam gap techniques with neutralizing 127 fortified observation posts between March 1944 and May 1945. Each post represented roughly 3 American lives saved, 3 men who didn't die performing a frontal assault, 3 families who never received a telegram. That meant approximately 381 lives preserved by geometry the Army had never bothered to teach. In June 1944, the Army War College received an anonymous technical manuscript titled Structural Deflection in Counter-Fortification Sniper Operations. It described the beam gap method with precise engineering detail, complete with mathematical formulas and diagrams. It recommended integrating the technique into official doctrine. The paper sat untouched in a filing cabinet for 7 months. In January 1945, the Army finally authorized a training program.